The thing about creepy stories that happen to you when you're alone is that when you tell them back to people later, nobody believes you. The lack of witnesses instantly makes folks think that you're exaggerating or that you're just outright full of it. In the case of this story though, I always counter their suspicion with a simple question. Why in the hell would I voluntarily get out of a perfectly functional working car and decided instead to walk the 10 miles back to town? Especially when you consider that it was absolutely hammering down with rain and freezing that night. At that point, they usually shrug, stuck for an answer, but look at me in a way that makes me think that they're trying to decide whether or not I am just crazy enough to walk back for no good reason. I can save the trouble of wondering that. I'm not. If there had been any other choice, if I hadn't been completely stuck, not to mention frightened out of my wits, then I would have driven home like I always did. I would not leave a perfectly good car by the side of the road. I would not voluntarily walk 10 miles in the pissing rain, and I certainly would not have spent half of that 10 miles frantically running as fast as I could from the spot. Whether you choose to believe what I'm about to tell you is up to you. At this point, I honestly couldn't give a damn. The road I left my car on was the long country road that stretched between Ayam village and the nearest city. For those who have never been to Ayam or travelled that road, which I suspect is pretty much everyone, I can tell you that the road is long, windy, and at that hour of the night very, very lonely. The total distance from the city is around 15 miles, but once you get off the motorway and go through a few twists and turns, you're out in the countryside and on a 10-mile road back to Ayam that really is a track to the back of beyond. In the daylight, the road can be quite pleasant. It's fringed on both sides by a dry stone wall. On one side, the fields drop away down to the river, and in the sunshine are home to flocks of local sheep and herds of cows happily grazing their days away on what is no doubt good pasture. On the other side, stretching uphill, the fields are sloped, and whilst there are a few farmers who tend to graze their flocks there, the grass peters out the higher you get up the hillside, and things get a little rocky and barren. For the motorist travelling at night, the journey is far less pleasant. The 10-mile stretch, as the locals call it, is devoid of street lamps, meaning that you have to rely on your headlights to find your way in the pitch black, which on nights like the one I'm talking about, where the skies have opened and the downpour makes the windscreen look like a river, can be rather difficult. The night the strange thing happened was the first big storm of the summer. For around 3 weeks before, the temperatures had soared way higher than was normal for that time of year and scorched the whole area to the extent that some of the green pasture had begun to wither and brown. In Ayam and the surrounding villages, the only topic on anyone's lips was rain. When will the rain come? How much rain did they need to get a good crop? How much rain did they have this time last year, and so on? For an outsider like me, who didn't own a farm and only moved to Ayam for his wife, it was the kind of farmer talk that bored me half to death. The great irony of the whole thing being that when the rain did finally come, those farmers who hadn't shut up about it for weeks were safely tucked up in bed, unlikely to ever feel a drop, whilst yours truly, who worked in the city and had to make the commute back to Ayam every night, was stuck right in the middle of it as the lightning crashed and the rain fell with such fury that it seemed to bounce when it hit the road. Doubly annoying was the fact that driving in such conditions meant I would have to slow down. For safety's sake, I reduced my speed, cursing the rain for reducing my speed almost to a crawl. Though as I did make slow progress forwards, I noticed that I was not the only one crawling in this torrent. To the bottom right of my windscreen, ensconced just below where the wipers were working furiously back and forth, was an enormous, bloated bug. Now let me tell you right now that I'm not a fan of the word bug. To me, it's an Americanism that's just a little bit too general. I mean, what are we talking here? Is it an insect or an arachnid? A moth or scorpion? Bug covers way too many bases. Usually I would say insect, or better yet, tell you the actual type of insect, so that you'd have a clearer picture of what I was talking about. I've used the word bug here because in this case I had no idea what the thing was, and somehow insect doesn't quite seem to cover it. The thing on the windscreen was large, around 5 inches long and thick, bigger than any insect usually found in this area, and in some ways more like a crab or some other crustacean you'd expect to find along the seafront. It was of a deep, opalescent green colour, with a slightly iridescent shell, and what appeared to be suckers on the ends of each of its 6 feet, with which it was clinging for dear life to the windscreen. I thought for a moment that it might stray close enough to the wipers to be either knocked off or smooshed by them, but it remained stuck there, plump and bloated on one side of the windscreen. I turned my attention back to the road and tried to focus, when I heard a low metallic thunk come from the back of the car, as if someone had thrown a snowball or a rock at it. Looking out of the side window, I could see no one, and certainly did not expect to see anyone standing there chucking rocks in the pouring rain. Confused and hoping that it wasn't a rock thrown up from the road that might have dented the car, I continued on before another loud thunk hit me, then another and another, at the back, then on the roof. Slowing the car even further, I remember looking behind me to see if I could make out what the hell was causing the noise. When I looked back again, I had my answer. Whereas before there had been only these strange insects on the windscreen, now there were 4, then 6, then 9. All around me the car dinged and thudded as if an army of kids with slingshots were firing at me, projectiles bouncing and ricocheting off the metal bodywork. Missiles, which I now realized, were bugs. Huge bugs, most the size of my fist, but some even bigger, and judging by the volume of the thuds denting my car, some even bigger still. Looking in disbelief at the specimens on the windscreen, some of them hanging heavily over the wipers, I saw that some of these things had not pincers or a proboscis, but a perfectly circular hole where the mouth should be. A hole which seemed to be lined all around with rows of tiny triangular teeth. For a moment, I wondered if I was dreaming, as around me more and more of these things slammed into the body of the car so that the entire thing shook on its axle. The effect was like being in one of those rare hailstorms you read about, where the hail comes down the size of golf balls. Only this was no hail. More and more of this hideous thing piled up on the windscreen, to the point that I was having to look over them to try and make out the road, until eventually I heard a loud crack as one of the wipers snapped off under the weight of one of them. Rolling to a stop, I tried to think what would be best to do. I couldn't really go on with one wiper and half a windscreen, could I? But at the same time, I didn't really want to get out and walk through what seemed to be a swarm of these awful things falling from the sky. So for a few minutes, I waited, watching as the windscreen, the bonnet, and doubtless the entire top of the car covered over with hundreds of these squirming things. As each one landed, it kicked and writhed for purchase, snipping and biting at others and letting off a low, soft buzz that made me itch all over. Still, the rain thundered down as I peered out of the side window and saw that the entire road was covered with these things, hundreds upon hundreds of them, skittering around and sloshing through the film of rain that coated the road's surface. It was then that the glass began to crack. Whether it was one of the insects, biting or piercing the surface, or the sheer weight of numbers as they piled on top of the screen, I don't know, but a large angular crack began to appear in the bottom corner of my windscreen. Suddenly, my mind filled with an awful vision of me, strapped into the driver's seat as these things poured inward on top of me. Hundreds of bodies, thousands of tiny legs scratching and crawling over my skin, into my clothes, my hair, my nostrils, and my mouth. Suddenly I had to get out, to escape before the glass gave way and the things poured in. Flinging open the side door, I jumped out and ran, covering my head and trying not to think about the crack and crunch under my feet as I sprinted headlong into the rain. After around 10 minutes, I realized that I could no longer see the bugs, nor even the lights from my car. Heart pounding in my chest, I continued to run and didn't stop until I got around halfway home. The next day was completely clear. No rain, no storms, and no sign of the bugs. I went back to the road and retrieved my car, the windscreen for which had been put right through, and drove it into the city to have the glass and some of the larger dents repaired. Seeing the car, my friend Artie, who was also a mechanic, said it looked as if I'd parked it at a golf course or driving range, since there were so many dents in the bodywork. I never did tell him what actually happened. I never heard anyone else mention the bugs. Not a single farmer brought it up or referred to it. I talked about it a few times, but after a few of the guys argued and looked at me like I was mad, I decided to keep my mouth shut. I only mention it now because about a week ago, I overheard a guy named Joe talking to his friend in the pub. He mentioned how on the night of the big storm, 2 of his cows had gone missing, vanished without a trace. Whether they were stolen or escaped somehow, he didn't know. The only thing he did know was that whoever had interfered with them had also done a number on the scarecrow he'd put up in the opposite field. Damn thing was completely stripped to tatters. Looked like a pack of dogs had gotten hold of it and chewed the damn thing till it was in bits. Hearing that, I was suddenly glad I had chosen not to stay in the car.